My aunt convinced my dying grandmother to change her will, so I proved she was manipulating her and made the whole family turn against her. What would you do if you discovered that your own aunt was manipulating your dying grandmother to steal your family's inheritance? Most people would probably confront her privately and hope for the best. But when I caught my Aunt Patricia systematically isolating my grandmother and convincing her to rewrite her will, I decided to gather evidence and expose her manipulation to the entire family. And by the end of this story, Patricia learned that greed makes you sloppy, and sloppy people leave evidence trails that destroy them. I'm Rachel Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. Until 6 months ago, I thought I had a normal, loving, extended family with the usual minor drama and occasional disagreements. My grandmother Eleanor was the matriarch of our family, a sharp, independent 89-year-old who'd raised 5 children and built a small fortune through smart investments and frugal living. That was before my Aunt Patricia decided that Grandma's money would be better served funding her gambling addiction than being distributed fairly among the family. Grandma Eleanor had always been clear about her intentions for her estate. She owned a beautiful house worth about $800,000, had investment accounts totaling around $1.2 million, and possessed a collection of jewelry and antiques that had been in our family for generations. Her plan was to divide everything equally among her 5 children, with specific items designated for grandchildren, who had special relationships with particular pieces. I'd always been especially close to Grandma Eleanor. She'd helped raise me when my parents divorced, taught me how to cook and manage money, and was the person I called when I needed advice or support. In return, I visited her every week, helped with grocery shopping and doctor's appointments, and made sure she stayed connected with friends and family. Patricia was my father's older sister, and she'd always been the problem child of the family. She'd struggled with gambling addiction for decades, had been through multiple bankruptcies, and had a history of borrowing money from family members that she never repaid. But she was also charming and manipulative when she wanted something, and she had a talent for making herself seem like the victim in situations she'd created. The first sign that something was wrong came in January, when I arrived for my weekly visit with Grandma Eleanor. Patricia was there, which was unusual because she typically only visited during holidays, or when she needed money. "Oh, Rachel, I'm so glad you're here," Patricia said with a bright smile. "I was just telling Grandma about how worried we all are about her living alone in this big house." Grandma Eleanor looked confused. "Patricia thinks I should consider moving to a senior living facility, but I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "Of course you are, Grandma," I said, giving Patricia a questioning look. "You're doing great here. Why would you need to move?" Patricia's expression became serious. "Rachel, we need to be realistic about Grandma's needs as she gets older. What if she falls and no one finds her? What if she forgets to turn off the stove? I think it's irresponsible for us to let her stay here alone just because she's stubborn." This was concerning because Grandma Eleanor was still mentally sharp and physically capable. She drove herself to appointments, managed her own finances, and lived independently without any problems. Patricia's sudden concern about her safety seemed manufactured. Over the next few weeks, I noticed that Patricia was visiting Grandma Eleanor much more frequently. When I asked Grandma about it, she seemed confused about why Patricia was suddenly so attentive. "She keeps saying she's worried about me, but I don't understand why. I feel fine, and my doctor says I'm in excellent health for my age." But I also noticed that Grandma Eleanor was starting to seem more anxious and uncertain about things that had never bothered her before. She mentioned concerns about her finances, worries about becoming a burden on the family, and questions about whether she was making good decisions about her care. "Patricia says I should think about updating my will to make things easier for everyone," Grandma told me during one visit. "She thinks the current version is too complicated and might cause problems for the family." This set off alarm bells for me. Grandma's will was straightforward and had been prepared by a competent attorney. There was nothing complicated about it, and it reflected her clear wishes about how her estate should be distributed. "Grandma, why do you think your will needs to be changed? You always said you wanted everything divided equally among your children." "I do, but Patricia says that might not be fair because she's had such a hard time financially. She thinks maybe I should consider the different needs of my children when I'm making decisions." I realized that Patricia was using emotional manipulation to convince Grandma to give her a larger share of the inheritance. She was playing on Grandma's natural desire to help her children and making her feel guilty about treating everyone equally. But I needed to be careful about how I responded. If I accused Patricia of manipulation without evidence, it could backfire and make Grandma think I was the one being greedy or manipulative. Instead, I started paying closer attention to what was happening during Patricia's visits. I began arriving earlier for my weekly visits and staying longer, which gave me opportunities to observe how Patricia interacted with Grandma when she thought no one was watching. What I discovered was a systematic campaign of emotional manipulation that was both sophisticated and cruel. Patricia would arrive with stories about her financial struggles, her health problems, and her concerns about her future. She'd cry about how hard life had been for her, how she'd never been able to get ahead despite trying so hard, and how worried she was about ending up homeless or unable to afford medical care. But she'd also make subtle criticisms about other family members, suggesting that my father and uncles were financially secure and didn't need inheritance money as much as she did. She'd point out that my cousins were young and irresponsible with money, implying that leaving them significant inheritances would be wasteful. Most insidiously, Patricia was isolating Grandma Eleanor from other family members. She'd schedule her visits during times when she knew others wouldn't be there, and she'd make comments designed to create suspicion and paranoia. "I hope Rachel isn't putting pressure on you about your will," she'd say. "I know she's always been your favorite, but it's important that you make decisions based on what's right, not just emotional attachments." She was poisoning Grandma's relationships with people who actually cared about her, while positioning herself as the only family member who truly understood Grandma's needs. The breakthrough came when I decided to start recording Patricia's visits. I set up a small voice recorder in Grandma's living room, hidden in a decorative bowl where Patricia wouldn't notice it. I told Grandma I was doing this to help her remember important conversations with doctors and family members, which was partially true. Over the next month, I recorded hours of Patricia's manipulative conversations. I captured her making false claims about other family members, pressuring Grandma to change her will, and using emotional blackmail to get what she wanted. In one particularly damaging recording, Patricia explicitly told Grandma that she deserved a larger inheritance because she'd sacrificed so much for the family over the years. "Mom, I know you want to be fair to everyone, but fair doesn't always mean equal. I've been the one taking care of family emergencies for years. I'm the one who dropped everything when Dad was sick. I'm the one who's always been there when you needed help." This was completely false. Patricia had actually been absent during most family crises, and she'd often made situations worse by borrowing money or creating additional drama. But the most disturbing recording was a conversation where Patricia coached Grandma on what to say to the attorney when she went to change her will. "Just tell him that you've been thinking about the different needs of your children, and you want to make sure Patricia is taken care of because she's had such a hard time. Don't mention our conversations about this. Just say it's something you've been thinking about on your own." Patricia was literally scripting Grandma's interactions with the attorney to make her manipulation seem like Grandma's independent decision. But I also discovered that Patricia's plan was even more extensive than I'd realized. She wasn't just trying to get a larger share of the inheritance. She was trying to become Grandma's power of attorney and gain control over her finances while she was still alive. Patricia had been telling Grandma that managing money was becoming too stressful for someone her age, and that it would be better to let Patricia handle financial decisions, so Grandma could focus on enjoying her remaining years. This was the final straw. Patricia wasn't just trying to steal from Grandma after she died. She was trying to gain control of her money immediately, so she could start using it to fund her gambling addiction. I realized I needed to act quickly before Patricia succeeded in isolating Grandma completely and gaining legal control over her finances. First, I made copies of all the recordings and created detailed transcripts of Patricia's most manipulative statements. I also documented the timeline of Patricia's increased visits and the changes in Grandma's behavior and statements about her will. Then, I reached out to my father and uncles to arrange a family meeting. I told them I had concerns about Patricia's influence on Grandma, but I didn't reveal the full extent of what I'd discovered. I wanted to present the evidence to everyone at once. The family meeting was held at my father's house on a Sunday afternoon. Present were my father and his 3 brothers, along with their spouses. I'd asked Patricia to come as well, telling her we wanted to discuss Grandma's care needs as a family. I started by explaining that I'd been concerned about some changes in Grandma's behavior and statements over the past few months. I mentioned that she seemed more anxious and uncertain, and that she'd been talking about changing her will and giving Patricia power of attorney. Patricia immediately went into defensive mode. "I think it's wonderful that Mom is finally thinking realistically about her future needs. She's 89 years old, and it's not fair for us to expect her to handle all the stress of managing her finances alone." "But she's never had problems managing her finances before," my Uncle David pointed out. "She's always been very capable and independent." "That was before," Patricia said. "People change as they get older. I've been spending more time with Mom lately, and I can see that she's struggling with decisions that used to be easy for her." That's when I decided to play the recordings. "Actually, Patricia, I think everyone should hear exactly what kind of help you've been giving Grandma." I played the recording where Patricia told Grandma she deserved a larger inheritance because of her sacrifices for the family. The room was completely silent as everyone listened to Patricia's manipulative arguments and false claims about her contributions to the family. Then I played the recording where Patricia coached Grandma on what to tell the attorney about changing her will. Patricia's face went white as she heard her own voice instructing Grandma to hide their conversations and present the will changes as her own independent decision. "This is outrageous," Patricia said, her voice shaking. "You recorded private conversations without my knowledge. This is probably illegal." "Actually, it's legal in this state as long as one party to the conversation consents," I replied. And Grandma knew I was recording conversations in her living room to help her remember important discussions. My father was staring at Patricia in disbelief. "Patricia, are you seriously trying to manipulate Mom into changing her will by lying about the rest of us?" "I wasn't lying. I was just helping her understand the reality of everyone's situations. You told her that David and Tom didn't need inheritance money because they were financially secure, my Uncle Michael said angrily. Tom just went through a divorce and lost half his assets. David has been supporting his disabled son for 15 years. How is that financially secure? Patricia tried to defend herself by claiming she was just looking out for Grandma's best interests and making sure she understood all the factors involved in estate planning. But the recordings made it clear that she was systematically lying and manipulating Grandma for her own benefit. The final recording I played was the one where Patricia discussed gaining power of attorney over Grandma's finances. The room erupted when everyone heard Patricia talking about how she could manage Grandma's money more effectively and make sure it was used appropriately. You were planning to steal from Mom while she's still alive, Uncle David said, his voice full of disgust. You were going to take control of her money and use it to pay for your gambling debts. Patricia broke down and started crying, claiming that everyone was misunderstanding her intentions and that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. She said she was just worried about Grandma's welfare and wanted to make sure she was protected. But the evidence was overwhelming. Everyone had heard Patricia's manipulative tactics, her lies about other family members, and her plans to gain control of Grandma's finances. My father stood up and looked Patricia in the eye. You're no longer welcome in Mom's house. You're not going to have any unsupervised contact with her, and if you try to continue this manipulation campaign, we'll seek a restraining order. The other uncles agreed. Patricia was effectively banned from having any meaningful contact with Grandma Eleanor until she could prove she was seeking treatment for her gambling addiction and had made amends for her manipulation. But the family also decided that someone needed to stay with Grandma more regularly to make sure she was protected from any future manipulation attempts. We created a schedule where family members would visit daily, and we arranged for Grandma to meet with her attorney to confirm that she didn't want to make any changes to her will or power of attorney arrangements. When I played some of the recordings for Grandma Eleanor, edited to remove the most hurtful parts, she was devastated to learn how Patricia had been manipulating her. I can't believe she would lie to me like that, Grandma said, tears in her eyes. I was starting to feel guilty about not giving her more help, but she was making up stories about everyone else to make me feel that way. Patricia has a gambling problem, Grandma. She was desperate for money, and she thought she could manipulate you into giving her access to your finances. I feel so foolish for believing her. You're not foolish. You're a loving grandmother who wanted to help your child. Patricia took advantage of that love, which makes her behavior even worse. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Patricia was completely ostracized by the family. None of her siblings would speak to her, her own children were disgusted by her behavior, and she was excluded from all family gatherings and events. She tried to apologize and claimed she was seeking help for her gambling addiction, but the damage was done. Everyone had heard the recordings and understood exactly how calculating and manipulative her campaign had been. Grandma Eleanor's will remained unchanged, and she designated my father as her power of attorney with instructions that Patricia was never to have any control over her finances or medical decisions. Patricia's isolation from the family was complete. She lost her support system, her access to family financial help, and her relationship with the grandmother who had always been willing to help her despite her problems. 6 months later, Grandma Eleanor is doing well and has regained her confidence and independence. She's no longer anxious about her finances or worried about being a burden on the family. The daily visits from family members have actually improved her quality of life and strengthened her relationships with everyone except Patricia. Patricia, meanwhile, has lost everything she was trying to gain. She has no relationship with her mother, no support from her siblings, and no access to the inheritance she was trying to steal. Her gambling addiction has gotten worse without family support, and she's facing bankruptcy again. But the most satisfying outcome was seeing how the family came together to protect Grandma Eleanor. The crisis created by Patricia's manipulation actually brought everyone closer and made us more attentive to Grandma's needs and well-being. At our last family gathering, Uncle David raised a toast. To Mom, who taught us the importance of family loyalty, and to Rachel, who showed us what it means to protect the people we love. The lesson I learned is that greedy people often reveal themselves through their own desperation. Patricia's manipulation campaign was so extensive and systematic that she left a clear evidence trail of her deception and lies. But I also learned that protecting vulnerable family members sometimes requires difficult decisions about cutting off toxic relatives who would exploit them. Love doesn't mean enabling people who would hurt others for their own benefit. Patricia thought she could use Grandma's love against her to steal from the entire family. Instead, her greed cost her the only family relationships that had ever been willing to support her through her addiction and financial problems. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making sure justice is served and protecting the people who matter most from those who would harm them. Grandma Eleanor is surrounded by family members who love her for who she is, not what she owns. And Patricia is alone with the consequences of choosing greed over love.